See the red dot at the top? That means we're recording.
And they want us to send
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Hope your tummies are all happy right now. It is my pleasure at this point to introduce to you Dr. Ed Lerner and Forrest Mars. The title of their presentation is Blockchain from Value to Valuation, Quality in the Cryptographic. Dr. Lerner is an assistant professor at the City University of New York. I am stopping and waiting.
Go ahead, you're ready. I'm sorry.
I'll start from here. Dr. Lerner is an assistant professor at the City University whose research is educational funding via cryptocurrency. His work proposes an innovative type of research funding using altcoins. These coins use technologies to collateralize the network and speed the pace of transactions. Additionally, these coins pay dividends, so an institution that purchases these coins could potentially engage in a lucrative form of dividend reinvestment. Using cryptocurrencies as a new funding stream, it is possible that simply garnering large amounts of capital and creating a nonprofit institute could be the future of funding scientific research. Forrest Mars is a New York City-based technology architect with a background in AI and cybernetics who founded New York's first and only free internet cafe and the city's first wireless internet service provider. Some of his other projects include creating a video delivery platform for the world's largest telephone network, New York City's first civic engagement platform for the Office of Borough President, and an AI-powered chatbot for healthcare delivery. He is president of the Community Free Software Group, a 501c3 foundation dedicated to advancing the cause of open information architecture, and is co-founder of Open Camps, which, as of 2016, was the largest open source event in history. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Ed Lerner and Forrest Mars.
Greetings. Do you want this side? Yeah, we should be good. If you had invested $1,000 into Bitcoin in the year 2010, last summer in June, that $20 would be, $1,000 would be $50 million.
Don't say that now.
Then during the peak last December, that same $1,000 that you would have invested in 2010 would have reached $500 billion. Million, not million. The billion one is coming.
Is it too late now?
That's what everyone asks me. And another thing is people are always asking me is, how do cryptocurrencies work? And my answer is very simple. I simply ask them, in the tradition of, Jewish people always answer a question with a question. Well, how do dollars work? First, you tell me how dollars work, and that usually stops the conversation pretty cleanly, because there are not a lot of people I run into that can actually explain from end to end how dollars actually work. But in this talk, we're going to try to explain from a very high level all the way down to the nuts and bolts how cryptocurrencies work.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Forrest.
This is really ringing bad.
Yeah,
so
this is ringing badly, isn't it?
there we go.
Go without it?
We're going without it, unless you guys like the ring.
So thank you for Sam and the society to invite us out. Forrest and I were lucky enough to be invited out in February, and we enjoyed our time greatly. And so what we want to do is give this Brownian random walk, if you will. If you're familiar with Brownian theory of motion, and kind of the random walk, that kind of undergirds financial theory. And in particular, what we hope to do is really take this random walk, talking specifically about cryptocurrency, But rather than just, I think, a simplistic or framing that you might get on other people's podcasts. And I don't want to say that, I'm not necessarily highlighting that it's going to be a sophisticated talk, but I think rather than getting into the jargon and using the traditional ways that people frame the space, we want to talk about value evaluation given a context of monetary theory, given a context of fiat, which specifically we refer to is money that's not backed by anything. So for example, we've been on the fiat system since Nixon took us off gold standard in the middle of Bonanza in August 15th, 1971. I've done that research. So I kind of had that conversation where we go back and forth, having this recursive conversation between fiat, gold, and really which provides this context in which we can talk about crypto.
And if either of us mention any jargon, feel free to, I don't know, wave your hands or just call us out. Like literally, if you hear any jargon, because it tends to be a jargon-free talk. As should be obvious from the title, we're going to be looking at quality in the digital age, what we're calling the age of quantification, because of the almost inconceivable powerful effects we're seeing on the basis of the increasing power to measure things. How quality is experienced, how it's understood, how it's expressed, and in particular, how quality is shaped by the power of quantification as the backdrop for an exploration of the concept of value with the goal of advancing a basis for a model of valuation, seeing quality as being rooted in, value being rooted in quality and valuation relating to quantification, leading to the question of whether quality can be measured. Just one of those things sort of taken for granted in a colloquial context, but in closer examination exhibits a challenging level of complexity, whether it's by its nature, it's somewhat akin to position or momentum, where measuring one means you can never see the other. Do we somehow believe that we're getting closer and closer to this thing we call quality, while it ultimately eludes us? And yet, despite these waters being much deeper than originally signposted, we tend to believe we have a handle on it, reflected in answers that we give to questions arising from the intersection of quality, technology, and economics, such as, has quality improved over time? We heard someone in one of the early talks say, in fact, that quality keeps getting better and better every day. Has technology improved over time? Has money improved over time? And I'd hazard a guess that most people might say that, yeah, technology has improved over time. It's kind of what technology does. And yet, we might also say that money, taken strictly in the sense of buying power, has definitely not improved over time in that sense. So without taking those positions as sort of given, the idea is naturally raised if we could leverage the quality of technology in order to improve the quality of money. Turns out that's pretty much happens over the long haul of history, right? With each successive era of technology leaving its imprint on the economics of how the economics of the day are transacted. Thus, in this talk, we're going to set out not just to entertain, but to really unpack the idea that blockchain is ushering in a new era of quality, not in the hyperbolic sense, but advancing a framework that can be used to understand cryptocurrency in the intersecting context of economic theory, the socio-political history of technology and money, informed by the salient notion of value and how value is captured, leading up to a model evaluation so as to be able to evaluate blockchain and cryptocurrency, both in general, like, what is this stuff? Is it real? Is this what's going on? But also in particular to specifically deployed coins and tokens.
So of course, that's a great way of framing what we're going to talk about, because often we'll be asked, which coin should we invest in? Is it too late to get into BTC? BTC is a ticker symbol for Bitcoin, so often you'll hear people within the community refer to, just like you might refer to a stock by its ticker symbol, people do the same thing with cryptocurrencies. So this idea of really what is quality merges with this idea of valuation, and in particular, that informs one's decisions around crypto. Crypto is, again, another kind of jargon term. Rather than saying the cryptocurrency investment space, people just simply say crypto. So, Forrest, you highlight this quality slide here.
Well, that's what we're here to
Talk about it.
discuss, right? We're literally, the name of this entire symposium is Quality in the Digital Age. So do we actually know what quality is? Do we only have a sense of it? Can we really define it? Can we quantify it? You know, in one sense, you know, in the sort of software quality assurance and in other, you know, industries where you have a quality assurance pipeline, quality is seen as the removal of defects, right? It's getting the fly out of the ointment. You sort of iterate over it, and you make the, you know, you make the thing better and better and better. You know, as we say, caveat emptor is not a business model. Thus, listening to your customers, very important source of quality. Now, that's not quality, but that's a really, really, really good indicator of quality. Throwing bodies at the problem is a really good way to attain this thing that we're calling quality, that we're trying to figure out if we sort of even know what it is. I'm struck by, you know, I find it fascinating the way the Apple Store is able to populate their store with fresh kids that are sort of, you know, fresh off the block or whatever, very young people, sort of not highly skilled. I think a lot of them aren't necessarily college graduates, but they attain a super high level of quality of service and customer satisfaction using just a pool of a lot of bodies, what we call throwing bodies at the problem. How are they able to do this? Well, because quality is not, turns out, it's not something you can automate well at all, because quality depends on the human factor and actually having just a person in that place, the person that may not have a high level of skills or like a super deep education or anything, just but being able to be person to person with someone already puts you in a position for quality because of the ability to contextually to process context in a way that automation and robots can't. We sort of tend to have this sort of belief out there in automation systems that people are bad robots, right? So the robots are really focused, they don't get distracted, they don't have biases, they're incorruptible, they just like do their thing. But it turns out people aren't bad robots. Robots are really bad people. Robots just do one thing, and if they get off track, you can, with Boston Dynamics accepted, you can kind of like knock them over. And they just have a very narrow focus, and they have no way of processing any context at all. Like they're just these little expert things. So throwing bodies is a way to attain quality. But when we talk about quality, oftentimes it's taken to be quantifiable. We think of quality as being the best or the most or the nth, right? And we think of a team that wins the most games. Well, they must be the best team. They must be the highest quality team. But wait, does that really make any sense? Wait, the team that won the most games last season, are they really the highest does that really make them the highest quality team? Just as one example, I mean, this is sort of like one of these an exception. They could have scuffed the football, right? So just because they won the Super Bowl, wait, why would we some of the high quality team? We can think of things like the best tasting chocolate, the highest quality fabric, the best tasting scotch, right? So there's this idea of what I call high Q, right? Highest quality that somehow gets substituted for what quality really is, and it's a version of quantified quality that we then take to be quality, but it's really not, right? Like the highest quality scotch, the best scotch, there is no such thing. If you think that you can put all the scotch on a linear gradation scale, and here's the best one over here, you're going to have a lot of problems with every other person that's drinking a different kind of scotch, and they're going to tell you that that is actually not true. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. So, but it works because of a strong association. It works because of it's an illusion of statistics. People are going to agree. Certain people are going to pay a lot for things that they consider highest quality, and you can sort of statistically aggregate what people think to be the highest quality. But that while that reinforces the idea that quality is something that can be quantified, it's not actually true. Quality itself, the thing that we're going after, ultimately can't be. You can change the slide. Quantified. Do we have to say ping or something?
I think just say Sam. We
I like
thumbs
ping.
up.
Ping.
Ping.
Yeah, so before we jump into this slide, Forrest, you made some really great points. This idea of, Forrest and I use this framework of throwing bodies at something. And to kind of give that idea, to flesh it out, is that, let's say, for example, Forrest and I have been really focused on cryptocurrency in ways that without listening, without reading, without spending the hours over the last few years, one wouldn't be able to make the nuances. And I'm not claiming that I'm able to do that. But that's the framework that I think you're highlighting. Do you want to give us some, in terms of quality, you make a really good point with the Apple Store. So then how did then quality relate to value?
I I think that's where we're trying to get here now, and sort of that's why we have the word value on the screen.
In a very great picture.
So, but in addition to having sort of value there, we have value in this seas of ones and zeros, all these bits, because after all, we're living in an age, the so-called digital age, in a symposium, that is, we're talking about quality in the digital age, where it seems that pretty much everything that can be quantified or measured has been. Quantification allows us to keep track of belongings, record dates, trade goods, allows us to calculate so precisely that we're able to fly to the moon and operate on people's brains, but it doesn't stop there. In this relentless pursuit of quantification, our measurements have become so powerful that they allow us to fathom numbers such as 8 million, which is the amount of plastic garbage measured in tons dumped into the ocean every year at the rate of 1 garbage truck per minute. Or 30 billion. Actually, I think it's 30 trillion. These numbers get big fast. 30 trillion, which is the number of 1 megawatt lasers that you would need to shine at the moon in order to illuminate it, which unfortunately would use up the world's oil reserves in 2 minutes. Or the amount of the US national debt, which is greater than the number of stars in our galaxy by not 1, but 2 orders of magnitude, right? Or you have,
Goodness.
right? So you have maybe 2 orders of magnitude above that. You have the number of bugs on our planet, which is greater than the age of the universe in seconds by another two orders of magnitude. And then 8 orders of magnitude above all that, you have the number of atoms in your body, right? And then 11 orders of magnitude above the number of atoms in your body, which is higher than all those other numbers, is the number of addresses in the IPv6 address space. Who knows what that is? So it's the new internet routing protocol that we ran out of IPv4 addresses, right? When they created the internet, there were enough addresses for like a certain number of computers, and now there are so many computers, there's literally not enough addresses for each one to have its own address. So we created the IPv6 address space, which has something like 467 quadrillion addresses, so it's enough to like map an individual item over the entire surface of the Earth, including all oceans, like every, I think it's less than a yard, so like that's what we can do to the entire Earth. And this is going to be useful for the Internet of Things, right? So every single thing, every single machine has its own address. But it certainly doesn't stop there, because above that you have the number of legal chess positions, which is less than the number of atoms in the Earth, which is less than the number of atoms in the Sun, which is less than the number of possible ways to arrange a deck of common playing cards. That possible arrangements for 52 cards, greater than every one of those we've talked about so far. And then you eventually come to an innocuous seeming number of 2 raised to the 256th power, which is the 256-bit address space. Now, I'm guessing probably every one of you here has a 64-bit computer in your pocket, right? And before we had 64-bit computers, we had 32-bit, and then before that it was 60, and before that was 8-bit arcades, right? So it's only be a couple generations where we go from 256 to 512, I mean up to 128 to 256. But yet, 2 to the 256 is a pretty big number, 115 quadrillion, which is which is somewhat disappointingly still 3 orders of magnitude below the total number of atoms in the observable universe. And then above that, we have the Shannon's number for the game tree complexity of chess, Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, and then eventually coming to the number of ways to arrange a tarot spread, which describes the destiny of your individual destiny, which, oddly enough, is actually greater than all those other numbers. And then eventually, we get to what I think is probably that's pretty much it. We're at the end there. That's everything we've quantified. And then we get to what I think is probably the largest conceivable number, certainly the largest number that I can conceive of, and that is orders and orders and orders of magnitude above everything we've talked about. It is the amount of error in the quantum theory's description of how much energy there should be in the universe and how much we could actually measure. As far as I can tell, for numbers that are quantifiable, for numbers that have any meaning whatsoever, the largest one there is this one. It's the error in the quantum theory between what it says should be in the universe, energy, which says this is how much energy in the universe, and how much we can actually see. So you could change the slide. Let me just go on. So what we're doing here is we're extending Richard Feynman's, the famous physicist, Caltech physicist, observation that economical numbers are larger than astronomical numbers. Because, in Feynman's time, there was the things that were astronomical were large, right? And he sort of very subtly pointed out that astronomical was big, but it wasn't as big as economical numbers, which tend to be big. Like, we have this capacity for numbering things and quantifying, and just the amount of debt, exceeds like the stars in the universe. So all this by way of saying that Bitcoin uses SHA-256, that 11 quadrillion vigintillion number, and moreover, these higher spaces of quantification are important in the cryptographic age, which not only counts and orders, but encodes, not in the colloquial sense of an encoded representation, but as a one-way algorithm that can be seen as a kind of logical counterpart to the directionality of time, which is, of course, defined by entropy, and entropy is exactly what we use as the basis for cryptography. So out of everything that we've just quantified, and everything that possibly can be quantified, what's the one thing that we can't quantify? This is the part where someone calls out the answer. There we go. There we go. So quality is the one thing we can't actually quantify because it is ultimately a subjective experience. The truth is, not just that there's no basis for quality to be quantified, but that it's logically contradictory. Quality by its very essence can't be quantified, even though we succumb to this way of thinking all the time in our endeavors to manage quality. And I would suggest that we manage quality in the same way that, in Adam Curtis's theory of hypernormality, we try to manage problems that we can't actually have access to. We've given up on solving problems. We realize we don't have access to that thing anymore, so we simply try to manage it. And the same thing with quality. We know we can't quantify it, but yet in our attempts to make it manageable, we end up managing it, but in a way that we could possibly give up on actually having direct access to it. And here's the further thinking with quality, that it's not only is it logically contradictory, but the entire experience of quality is logically contradictory. And for those of you that sort of are still trying to get a grasp on quality, it's really this notion of time that we talked about. It's really related to time. Your experience of quality is directly related to your experience of time. Time speeding up and slowing down. If you're having fun, if you're not liking something, you have that subjective time dilation, which is not the same as actually real physical time dilation through like gravitational effects, but seems very real. And this is what we're talking about, this very subjective, but very real on a personal level experience of quality. And this is what we're trying to guarantee in our systems.
What's that?
So the point here is that we're now moving on to this point where we're not simply just measuring things, but we are making cryptographic guarantees. The reason we're trying to quantify quality is because we want to guarantee something at the end of a delivery process. Usually it's a product, something coming out of a factory or a service from a company. We're taking it one level deeper, right? And we're guaranteeing, and this delivery process is actually a delivery process of a private experience of quality across a public space, whether that's a room where we're gathered for a symposium, or whether that's the internet and wires, or whether that's like the universe at large, to another person. And whether you're doing it on a broadcast means where you're delivering private personal experiences to people as a service, or whether you're simply taking your private experience and you're trying to find a way to guarantee that it can be delivered to another person. This is the power of cryptography that leverages these incredibly huge numbers to create the space inside of which it can guarantee these kinds of transmissions. You can probably change the slide because because it turns out that value is somewhat relative, right? As every good computer scientist knows, value is what you assign to a variable. Every single computer, every single memory, and every single computer, and all over the world, every single bit, 1 and 0, it stands for something. But that's not what we're talking about when we say value. It's not the 1 or the 0, right? We're talking about what value is. Can we actually? Because are we trying to deliver quality, or are we trying to deliver value? And it turns out value is another one of these concepts that we sort of think we have a grasp on it, but it's like, okay, but what do we mean by it? So I did this thing where I did a Google image search for value, and what I got, because I wanted to have a cool slide for you guys, and what I got was a list of results that were the word value rendered in different fonts. And this is very interesting. This sort of can tell you a lot because you're doing an image search. What you're searching for is its cultural representation as it's algorithmically defined. And so a lot of words you search for, you find a cluster of images. But there are certain words that you search for that you don't get any pictures, right? All you get is that word back, as words, so like in different fonts and things. And I find those are very interesting words in our culture, and value is one of them. It's another one of them that's hard to, it may not work on an image search, but we have no symbol for it. We have no gestalt or heuristic that we use, is money. We don't have any way to represent the concept of money. When we represent the concept of money, we either have a stack of coins or a wad of bills. That's not money, that's like some very specific material form of currency, right? Or you have a basket of currencies, the traditional, there's no Unicode for money, there's there's nothing that represents money except a collection of all the signs that represent different kinds of money. The pound, the euro, the dollar. And value, what these bits ultimately represent is, we find that different participants have different values. And, like quality, value is subjective, but it's also rational. This was a funny thing. So someone was talking about, I don't know, whatever people are talking about, and this guy, Alpha Male 212, I hope you're not in the audience today, as we call you out. And he was like, well, why would you do that? Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone do anything if there was no financial benefit? Except it turns out there are lots of things that have value that don't have financial benefit. Like, for example, the value of friendship, right? So you can value your friends, but you wouldn't have a valuation on your friends, unless you're Alpha Male 212 apparently, in which case your friends might not take very, very kindly to that. But yet value can be captured using a medium exchange, and not only captured in a medium exchange, but using a model of valuation payment.
So I think, why don't you go ahead.
So the point is that valuation serves the purpose of quantifying value. Valuation quantifies value, by which we mean representing something that is essentially personal, something that can be something that can be publicly exchanged. On with, we build models of economic behavior that can both predict and explain on the basis of aggregate behavior of individuals acting in a very subjective way. For example, but note what these models have in common. One, they're accounting for a public exchange of some private value or personal quality. And then note also, too, that there are lots of macro models out there, historically speaking, that I think are really better considered as frameworks, because if we that undergird sort of three actual valuation models. So, for example, cryptocurrency valuation model might take into account market price, market cap, price movement, algorithm, hash function, a review of the code, the social sentiment around it, maybe the governance model of the coin. Like, all these might be elements in a coin's specific valuation model to figure out how this coin is doing. But yet they don't rise to the level of what we call valuation theory, which is something like Adam Smith's classic production model, which really replaced the previous utility models of value prior to him, but yet didn't really get so far as the coming exchange models. So that, of course, the big question in his day was, why would anyone buy a diamond because you can't eat it, you can't drink it? Like, how do you quantify the value of this thing, right? You can't eat it, you can't drink it. No one could sort of figure that out. It was a weird problem until exchange theory comes along and says, well, actually, turns out the reason that you put value in that thing is because you think it's going to lead to something else. You can exchange the diamond for the hand of your betrothed, or you can sell it on the market, or something like that. And this was a huge leap. But then it turns out, the theory, you quickly devolve into hair splitting, if not hair pulling, finer grained theories of value and valuation. It's kind of like this water everywhere, Matryoshka doll of subjective valuation and the intrinsic theory of intrinsic valuation, all these different theories. But what all which I consider frameworks, right? So these are all frameworks to create your model valuations. What they all have in common is they have a predictive component and an explanatory component, and they need both, right? So your model, your valuation model, which is based on some framework, whether it's exchange value or one of the other sort of newer ones, it has to predict in an accurate way, or else it's useless, right? And it has to explain why it's predicting that so you can understand it. Now it turns out, sort of on Wall Street, you don't really need the explanatory part. Like the bots that the quants run, and are trade triggered, they don't necessarily explain the combined psychology of the market of why they're acting in the way they're doing. They just fire. The point is that valuation serves the purpose of quantifying value, by which we mean, representing something essentially personal, something that can be publicly expressed. And yet, our valuation models still, slide please, don't seem to be able to account for the extreme subjectivity of value. The valuation on the basis of value, which is completely subjective, we can build models of valuation such that even though people are never going to agree on the value of, for example, art, the founder of the largest alternative investment firm in the world, with assets of over 25 billion under management, can decide that this painting by William de Kooning called Interchange is actually worth $304 million, making it briefly for 2 years, and that's a lot of change, by the way, the most expensive painting in the world, until it was actually dethroned last fall by a new painting which was sold for nearly $500 million. So the point here is, find two people that can agree on the valuation of art, the value of art, and yet this guy, Kenneth Griffin, presumably didn't buy this because he took a shine in his eye to it. He presumably bought it because he ran a valuation model over it, and he deduced, using his framework, using his model, that this painting is worth $300 million in a way that another painting by de Kooning isn't, in a way that another painting by an abstract expressionist of that time is not, by a way that, my napkin doodles are not, right? Which doesn't take a valuation model to explain. But actually, having briefly worked in a museum, I was struck by the difference between the public-facing dialogue and the internal dialogue. The public-facing dialogue is educating people about the value of art and its importance in the history, and there's references to aesthetics and culture and signification and all these things. Behind the scenes in the boardroom, none